The coronavirus pandemic has changed everything and forced us to rethink the way we live, work, and even play. And the positive side of a large life changing event like this one is that it becomes a strong catalyst for us to rethink a lot many more things, including the future of work and workplaces. In this series, brought to you by Brookfield Properties, we're exploring ideas, thoughts, and strategies on how design can play an important role in making the workplace, not just the workplace, but the larger built environment and even our cities much more healthier and productive. So welcome, I'm Manisha Natarajan, and my expert guest, Manit Rastogi, is the founder partner of one of India's best known architect firms for sustainable design, Morphogenesis. Manit, thanks so much for making time for this chat.
Thank you, Manisha. Pleasure to be on board.
So let me start and shoot my first question. Now, the pandemic has given us a whole new reason for some deep thinking and even questioning, I must say. What, according to you, are some built environment, city development, larger practices which are currently under scrutiny because of this new reality?
So, Manisha, let's look at what's happened here. Okay, and let's talk about the city. What's happened here is that the cities with the largest density are the ones that are the most affected. We never thought that would happen. The borders of the cities were shut down and the cities were contained, cutting off supply chains to the city. We never thought that would happen. Public transport, modes of communication, they were shut down. We never thought that would happen. Now, these are the lifelines of a city, and our cities were planned around them. Now, I'm going to address each one individually on these three sort of main agendas. So on the notions of density, the thinking to date has been that as all cities are now based on transit-oriented development, densify the center, buildings go vertical, and the issue really is the fact that the mobility becomes easier. However, that has obviously proven to be completely an incorrect model. And we therefore now have to begin to think, and I think that's the real thinking that's going to happen and how our cities of the future should be. And maybe we should stop thinking of a cities as cities of 10 million, 15 million people. We should start thinking of micro cities, which are interconnected through a series of greens, each node in itself fully sufficient to deal with the multitudes of education and medical. But maybe each node is only 5 to 10,000 people. They're micro neighborhoods, self-sufficient and interconnected. The city, as we know it as one homogeneous mass, may cease to exist in the future. Because it's not only about COVID. It's about the fact it's very clear we are totally unprepared for pandemics. And it could be a pandemic, it could be a large earthquake, it could be plague, it could be anything. And we haven't built our cities for resilience. So I think at that one level, we'll see a shift. Second is of how we look at the master plan of a city. Now, if you look at any city in India, land is allocated to people, to private people. And they essentially end up putting boundary walls around them with the net effect that mobility is pushed to vehicles and slow mode transportation, which is essentially walking and cycling, which as we know today, is a far greater form of transportation than trying to get into public transport to go from anywhere, point A to point B. And I think we're going to see a shift in master planning from a land use model to an urban design model, where the horizontal plane of the city belongs to everyone and the buildings belong to private players. And that, in a sense, should actually bring democracy to the space of the city and equity and equality and in that sense, resilience. The third point about borders shutting down and supply chains being cut off. Now, if this thing carried on for a really long time, we'd be suffering with many other aspects of water, food, waste, etc. So I think that the impact of that is going to be that we have to start thinking of cities as being self-resilient and self-sufficient, and that sort of always brings me to the point of evaluating a city for carrying capacity. So if there's Delhi is 1,500 square kilometers of land and gets 800 mm of rainfall a year, and an X amount of sunshine, then what is the maximum carrying capacity of our city, which can self-sustain, both in terms of urban farming, both in terms of waste disposal, fresh water supplies, and we'll have to start thinking about that with lesser and lesser dependence on global supply chains just to survive. It's like the human body must be able to
Wow.
live on its own, not interconnected with everyone else. And I think that's sort of going to be the big changes we'll see, we should see coming at the city level, all for the good, all for the better. And hopefully we won't let this pandemic go to waste in how our cities of the future are going to look like.
I know this is a complete 360 shift in thinking of planning cities. So you said micro cities, self-sufficient cities, and the master planning changes from land use to actually very, very self-sufficient microcosms, right?
Right.
Interesting. Let's see. I hope we don't forget all of this when it's over and go back to living exactly the same way. But let me come to now my micro question. Every corporate wants to do the very best currently in this situation to ensure a safer workplace and a return to normalcy. So, what,
Correct.
according to you, are some of those 3 to 4 must do's for corporate India to make that happen?
So I'm going to break that question up into three parts. One is the building itself, the campus or the building. The second is the actual office itself inside the building. Uh, so at the campus or at the office level, I think a lot of emphasis will have to be paid on how people get in and get out. Our buildings, most office buildings are quite large. Typically speaking, 500,000 square feet, typical building would have about 5,000 plus people working in it. Now, our lifts were designed to carry maybe 20 people in the lift, but now we can't, social distancing norms are going to make a big impact on that. Longer queues, more people waiting in the lobby. So I think what we are going to see is a complete shift in thinking of how we design parking, from parking, how we design, or drop-offs for people coming by public transport or by shared pooling, how people are going to go up the elevators and how they're going to get to their floor. And essentially what we may begin to see is a concept that we're working on called interlocked buildings. So you break, much as I spoke about the city being broken down into microcosms, you break the building down. So you break a 5 lakh square feet building down into 5 buildings of a lakh square feet each one serviced by an independent set of lifts, which is currently part of the same core, but opening at a different point in the, so one could, at different points of access of lobby. So not one lobby, 5 different lobbies. And so they become 5 interlocked buildings, and you take that population of 5,000, you split it 1,000, and that way, and you provide sufficient room for people to get in and get out. And that integrated with security systems, which are contactless, along with parking systems that are intelligent, should allow people to get in and get out in under 2 to 3 minutes rather than the half an hour that it would take at peak time. So I think that's one key area that corporates have to think about, not only about their own office inside. Safety does not begin when you enter the workplace. Safety has to begin for your employees from the time they leave their house. And you have to be able to think through that whole ecosystem from when they leave their house to when they come to the office and they get back, not only from when they walk through the office door. So, and there are, several amazing solutions that we've also discovered along that line. And that's not as an architect. We have an office in Mumbai, and people were, afraid to use public transport or to use an Ola Uber to come to work. And we set out, we've done a deal with a self-hire company that's giving us a car at 15 to 20,000 rupees a month. The employee pays half, the firm pays half, and the employee can use it for this period as a self-drive. Okay, and it's sort of, so you have to think through that whole connectivity of coming in and going back. So that's one level, including the vertical transportation as well. Number 2, along with that, you also have to consider the other level of humanity, which is all the service staff in a building. Now, typically speaking, for 5,000 people working in a building, there'll be approximately close to several hundred housekeeping, security, etc. And then, some office or the other is going on an interior fit out, and there will be workmen coming in and out. What are the procedures in place and protocols to allow for that to happen in a highly hygienic and sanitized way? Number 3, all office buildings should have a 4 to 6 bed infirmary with where people who are report a fever, etc., can be immediately taken with a direct access to the outside for an ambulance evac. Okay, so we have to start thinking resilience in that sense. Along with that, second point is on once you enter inside the office, Now what? Now, I'm going to address two or three different areas. One is the sense of wellness. So, I'm not going to talk about how desks should be arranged or screens should be put or contactless switches and all. No, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to go to the point that one, I think we should mandate by law that all offices should be at least 75 to 90% daylit. This relationship with the outside. And I think that is critically important. Rather than sitting in a sealed box the whole day, we have to start thinking of the office environment as an interactive environment between the outside and the inside. Well-being. Along with the natural daylight, okay, we must have a sense of some level of ventilation. So instead of only drawing up fresh air from ducts, we should begin to think about breathable facades, where the facade is semi-permeable, allowing for the right amount of fresh air in infiltration. We should also begin to compulsorily, in my opinion, have a part of the office which is a outdoor space. Okay, a little terrace, a little balcony, which could also be carved out from inside the floor plate, but the facade missing, so people can step out from a centrally air-conditioned environment and go outside and have a cup of tea, have a meeting, and we have to be, we have to forget the fact that we need a person nailed to their desk, sitting on a computer. We've got to begin to think of offices as highly dynamic, socially interactive, but obviously safe environments. And we should be creating spaces allowing for offices to do that. I'll share something with you a bit later on that. So that's the sort of, really the second piece. And the third piece, which I think is also very, very critical, is about the fact that a lot of amenities in an office building. So, that's why people go to office buildings. You work and then you have amenities. So there may be a cafeteria. Now, these cafeterias will have to go through a whole transformation. Gyms, now typically cafeterias will be 400, 500 seaters. Everyone goes for lunch in a cramped 1.5, 2 hour window. They're sitting next to each other. That's, in today's world, is extremely dangerous. So how do we solve that problem? And how we solve that problem is you cut down the capacity by less than half, but where do the remaining half go? Now you begin to look at all the outdoor spaces that are available in and around that building. The rooftops, the outdoor spaces, there may be roads within the campus, pedestrianize everything, create outdoor spaces, outdoor cafes, bring in dry misting, put shading into play. And maybe even through the year, we can have a combination of this indoor and outdoor amenity spaces. We can have outdoor gyms, okay, as long as they're well protected and climatically comfortable. And we have incredible amounts of technology which can be deployed to do this, for making the outdoors comfortable, for taking the amenities out, okay? And I think that's a great potential over there. Not a single car should be within the campus. They should all go directly to the basement, and everything else should be amenity outdoors. Okay, that's I think top agenda for corporates to look at. So much like I said about the city, I'm saying that about the office building. Stop thinking about your office as the confines of what you're paying leasable rent on. Start thinking about the office as a microcosm, as a micro city. From the moment you enter the boundary wall of the campus, that's where it begins.
It all begins. Very interesting ideas, and I think very practical as well to implement. This is the way everybody should be thinking. Break down the building. You can't have 5,000 people going vertically up. And then you also spoke about interactive spaces. Have those spill out areas. Make sure there's enough ventilation. I think an air conditioning duct, if I'm not mistaken, it takes about 2 hours to circulate air in a space. So it's really very, very clear that ventilation is a key point, and outdoor spaces have to become much, much more, both in terms of amenities and even just as workspaces. All right, that's just recapping what you've said. Next question. What about your own fraternity? I know it's challenged right now. There are corporations talking to you, but change is not that quick. If you look at the history, Manit, every 10 years, we've probably seen one large design change. So we've probably gone from cubicles to open spaces over a decade. And we've only now started talking about biophilic designs. What are the challenges that the architect fraternity is dealing with?
I think the biggest challenge is in between the 2 years. I think the ability to think outside of, I think the key shift it has to be that we've got to think about architecture, not for the sake of architecture, but for the sake of people. We've got to start thinking it's what its primary purpose is. And its primary purpose is to provide for shelter, safety, for whatever activity that building has been fundamentally designed to do. Now, okay, and when we start putting the user at the center of the design process, everything changes. And I tell this to my own architects. If you're working on a residential project where there are lots of apartments, I said, the test of the scheme is that find me that one apartment that you will not buy because there's something wrong with it that you've designed, and then redesign it. But if you're not going to pick it for yourself, then you've done you've done a shitty job.
Not
and
done
that's the
justice
test.
to any buyer who might, buy
End
it.
up buying that. Absolutely. So, I think so. That's one level of challenge, to think beyond yourself, to think beyond the grandeur of immortality of having built the great Taj Mahal or the great building. But beyond immortality, start thinking about the people who are going to use the space. So that's one. Two is what this pandemic has taught us, and there will be more, is the fact that no matter what a building was designed to do, so we understood typologies. A hotel is like this, and a hospital is like that. Institutions are like this, office buildings like that. But look at what's happened. Hotels are being used as quarantine centers of hospitals today, as extension of hospitals. Right. Now, what's the challenge? In a hospital, you design the air conditioning system for negative pressure. So you suck the air so that you can filter it through HEPA filters. So, and a hospital is always under negative pressure, but a hotel is under positive pressure because you want to keep the dust out. Okay. Now, when you use a hotel as an extension of a hospital, which we're doing all over the country, by the way, and that's been mandated in several areas now because they're running short of rooms, it's a completely incorrect system. Now, but a small switch in how if we had thought about the design, it would have been very easy to do then. So we've got to start thinking about buildings, not only for the use that they've been put to or they've been designed for, but for a multitude of users, because under disaster management, it should be used for anything and everything. Okay, so that's on hotel. Now, if you look at residential, we designed apartments for people to live in. However, they're being used, learn from home. They're being used as a school. They're being used as an office, work from home. What does that teach us? That teaches us that a home in itself is a microcosm of a city. It's a mixed use development which changes its character through the day. And, I've always been a sort of fan of Japanese design for no other reason than for its simplicity and its darkness. Now, if you look at very clean line. Now, now I've really understood the power of that design. And look at it this way. If you look at a Japanese typical home, no room has a function. It's only a space with very thin walls that move, and any space can be used for anything depending on the time of the day. So as it can be used for dining, for a tea ceremony, for sleeping, for meeting people, depending on where the sun is, where the wind is, and it adapts itself through the day. And that's why it is so stark. It's not so stark because of a style of architecture. And that serves their need. But we will have to rethink residential from that perspective completely. We'll have to start rethinking retail, malls. We spent the last 30 years aping the mall concept. We brought everything into a container, pretty much left all the daylight out, completely artificially air conditioned. And I think the time has come now to reevaluate the retail model and move it back to the bazaar, outdoors, but well controlled, and retail in that sort of very open format with eyes everywhere, and rethink the whole box of retail and how does retail really happen. We have to begin to think about landscape design. Landscape design, it should not be the domain of just being aesthetic but it has to serve the multitude of purposes that it has to be useful. What we should begin to be calling functional landscapes or production landscapes. If you plant something, it should give you food. You know, why should you not be able to plant trees that actually give you either a mango whatever? It should give you some fruit. If you're planting shrub, they should give you, let it give you some subsidy. Let it give you, and that's beautiful. And the spaces in between should be able to be used for something, for the old, the young, the whatever. So we're going to come, that my point really is we have to do a lot more with a lot less. And whatever is there, we have to get a 10x factor for it. We have to really push it to those boundaries, those limits where, given the fact that we've overconsumed everything on this planet, it's time to take what we have and, multiply its possible usages.
So you brought me to the next question. And I think this line pretty much sums it up. We have to do a lot more with a lot less. I know when you talk about shrinking the city, automatically that means a lot better design, sustainable design, lower carbon footprint in terms of everything, transport, you save so much. Having said that, what else do you think has this pandemic forced you to think about when it comes to sustainable design? Carry forward from already what you've spoken in your first answer when you say shrink the city and make it self-sufficient. According to me, that itself makes it so much more sustainable.
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. I'm going to get a little personal on this one because in all this time that I've been at home, locked up, so to speak. I've been sort of staring at things all around me, and I'm looking at things and saying, if it gets hot, there is a AC to deal with it. If I have to drink water, it's coming out of a purifier that I've installed. If my electricity breaks down, I have an inverter or a UPS. Some may have DGs. If I have to get anywhere, I need a car. I can't even step out because right out, I don't have a pavement in, the irony of it is that when I step out of my own house and I live in a reasonably okay area, the cars are parked on the pavements and people are walking on the road. I mean, how upside down is all of that? Okay. While the car should be on the road and people should be on the pavements. And because there's the notion of safety, there is a CCTV or there's a guard. Okay. If you want to eat anything, we disinfect it first, anything fresh that comes in. So I'm not really beginning to understand what have we really built out here. But, there's nothing that I'm doing which does not need something to fix it. Everything is broken and therefore there is a fix for it. So I think that's the starting point of the next level of sustainability. And where I'm coming from is this. Sustainability is no more about saving the planet. Sustainability is about saving ourselves. And that's the key difference in that form of thinking. And saving ourselves is it may sound like a ridiculous idea, but it really is not. So let me give you an example of an office building. And I've been talking about the example of air conditioning, and it just occurred to me that not just, but over this period, that if you see the office building that you sit in, or any office building anywhere in the world, the cold air supply, fresh air comes from the top, and the stale air is also taken from the top. So the air is mixing all along the way. While it should have been a one-way stream, the supply should have come from below, and the extraction should have been on top, because hot air also rises naturally. Okay, and that simple act, right, would make it as hygienic as a hospital's air conditioning system without doing much. But we seem to have this sort of, we seem to have got the basics, really
messed up.
Really wrong.
Let's use a kind word called messed up.
Okay, I'm looking, and it's been amazingly, it's been raining pretty much all through these 3 months. Okay, and I'm tracing this raindrop falling down, then going into some stormwater drain, then getting out of my house, and we're taking it out of the city through a deliberate network. We theoretically take it to the river, and the river takes it away from Delhi. How stupidly bizarre is that? If anything else, all that rainwater should be going to my park, and the park should be used as a natural sump to store the water, to put it back into the aquifers of this area, not drive it out to the ocean through the rivers. And if so, so it's really right. It's really about, looking at each of these elements and deciding to do and say, how can we find the simplest solution to fix it so we save ourselves? The planet will survive. The planet will save itself.
Right.
That will
Well,
that
it's
will never be a problem.
and Manit, this pandemic has taught us that it knows how to save itself.
Oh, of
Really,
course.
it's pushed us back into our homes, made us consume less, made us travel less, lower our footprints. It hasn't given us a choice. Well, I'm going to conclude here. I think two things that you've said have really resonated with me. First is that sustainability can only we'll only scratch the surface of sustainability unless we make it personal, isn't it? I think that's
That's
the
right.
most important thing. And you really have to save yourself first. On that note, I'm going to conclude, because just on sustainable design and sustainability, I can have a full half an hour discussion with you, but I'm going to leave it for the next time. Manit Rastogi, as always, a pleasure to have you on our series.
Thank you, Manisha. It's a pleasure talking to you always.
And to all of you, thanks so much for joining us. And well, watch out this space for a lot more discussions and conversations. Goodbye.
Thank you.